Welcome to another Monster Monday, the best way to start your week. I aim to bring you Pathfinder 2nd Edition minions, monsters, and menaces, and this one is going to be a bit of the last of those. Following on from last month, I've made a variant Kholo in the form of the Callous Commander, the Packmaster.
Pack it up, pack it in, let me begin. I came to win, battle me, that's a sin.
Hyenas are one of the many animals that fascinate me, largely due to their scavenger nature, extraordinarily powerful bite force, and their whole habit of cackling. As such, it's no surprise that Kholo, which I still think of as gnolls, are also up there on my list. I don't see them featured as overarching enemies, but I want to add to their already considerable roster with yet another addition. Aside from the common connection these critters share with hyenas, Kholo in my setting are deeply tied to undead, and so the Packmaster here is intended to work alongside both them and their hyena pets. As such, I had to shoot for a mid-level creature, one that can be run with a proper pack of hyenas or undead, maybe one that's little column A, little column B, and thus landed on level 5. At this level, you can run it alongside a quartet of hyenas or a pair of hyenodons and still have it be a moderate encounter for a 5th level party. Trait-wise, we're looking at Kholo and Humanoid, which is pretty basic but doesn't really require any further bells or whistles. The Packmaster doesn't actually feature any high ability scores. It has a pretty healthy spread, as it is meant to serve as a sort of enabler and commander rather than a full-on combatant. Now Kholo are a bit more brawny, leading to a moderate strength, which it matches with a moderate charisma, so that it can better lead and direct its pack. That same burliness affords it a constitution in between low and moderate values, whereas its dexterity and wisdom are properly low, with its intelligence being even lower than that. Though still not in the negatives. I opted to use a fairly standard moderate perception score, and accompanied it with the low light vision of the Kholos. However, I did add the scent ability, with the idea of simply tying the Packmaster a bit more into the creatures that it commands. It does still come with a whole host of skills, starting with a high athletics and nature skill. It uses the first to trip up opponents and set them up for allies, while the latter is used to command these same companions on a more meta level. Its acrobatics, intimidation, and religion all use a moderate value, with the middle of these perhaps being the most important and letting it further debuff foes. This leaves it with a low diplomacy and survival skill, covering both its bossing of beasts and the ability to track and hunt down prey. Having the players escape Kholo captivity only to be hunted by a Packmaster and its pets could be a very fun concept to explore or an encounter to run. The general idea of the Packmaster being a bit of a backseat driver leads to it using a moderate armor class for the build, and in general its defenses might look a little softer. Keep that in mind because I do have it working with a high pool of hit points to enhance its overall survivability. But we hit a few more of those soft points when we look at its saving throws. Its fortitude and reflex saves are both moderate, whereas its will save is full on low. I suppose you could argue about all of these simply using a moderate value, but this isn't something I usually do in the first place, and something about this setup just felt right for this particular predator. Defense is done, we can talk attacks, which aren't anything too crazy. Keeping it simple, I decided to make all of the Packmaster strikes use a moderate attack bonus. Again, I'm not leaning into any crazy values because the Packmaster is mostly a commander or buffing sort of creature. Its main weapon is its whip, which comes with a whole host of traits, but ultimately only deals low damage. Creatures of this level shouldn't have striking weapons yet, but I can only justify so much of a bonus and the 2 dice help get it where this weapon needs to be. Beyond that, we have a jaw strike as seen on most Kholo, and most of them have it use the agile trait. A larger bonus to the die doesn't feel as out of place here, which means I can use that single die and still have it reach low damage. And that is actually pretty consistent throughout the Packmaster's design. I decided to include a range strike for the Packmaster with some javelins as well, allowing it to hurl these low damage little spears to get in some extra hurt against a foe besieged by her malicious minions. Perhaps the most core component of this Commanding Kholo's kit is its Wild Pack. This aura provides animals and undead within a short range with the Pack Attack ability. a feature also included on the Packmaster itself. This grants some extra damage to those affected by it, and for creatures that already have this sort of ability, such as hyenas or my last laughs, it bumps up the dice of their innate pack attacks, since I did want this ability to still affect them in some way, because it actually ties into a few other effects. Before we move into some of those abilities though, I want to give a quick shout out to Hyena Empathy, an ability inspired by the Druid's Wild Empathy, but a little more focus on the creatures related to the Kholo. I do think, if you really wanted to, you could actually switch up what creature types this affects, depending on the type of Packmaster that you want to run. Relating to some of the commander design and its DNA, this dangerous daunting dame features Sikkim.
Kill him.
I like mixing up maneuvers with munches, letting one of the pack drag a creature into position, hopefully in range to trigger a pack attack, while another follows that up with a strike. Like I said, this is pretty directly taken from the double team tactic of the commander, but it isn't the only way that we can really bring our pack to bear. For example, Savage the Prey is a reaction, you know that I love me some reactions, that triggers when the Packmaster, or one of her mates, trips a creature. In the case of the Packmaster tripping a creature, she can allow an ally a chance to strike at this downed foe. If the reverse, she instead gets a chance to strike this vulnerable target. Either way, if this savage blow lands, it leaves the victim with a vicious wound as they begin taking some minor persistent bleed damage. There is a tiny part of me that wonders if maybe I shouldn't have based this bleed damage off of the pack attack of the creature that made the strike, but this at least gives you a solid base to build off of. Rounding out the kit is an ability that has two ways of approaching it. My initial attempt with Motivate was to make a Kholo that was the traditional evil that they were originally designed as, wicked and sadistic slave drivers. As such, my initial and still remaining design for Motivate is to have it deal minimum whip damage to an ally that would be affected by the Packmaster's aura. In return, the creature becomes quickened for 1 round, but it doesn't respond well to this repeated abuse. However, in a game about killing monsters, some people still get understandably upset about animal abuse. I'm not going to fault anybody for that. I have offered an alternative in the Packmaster's sidebar. Instead of dealing damage to grant Quicken, the Packmaster can instead simply bolster a creature with temporary hit points, letting it hang in the fight longer and keeping it hardy, hale, and healthy. There's a good little bit there, so let's take a second to unpack our Packmaster. Party to pets, putrid and primitive, this puckish Packmaster pulls players into peril by pitting its puppets against their prone personage with pugnacious punishment. Back when I unveiled the last laugh, I talked about making a Kholo that could work alongside it, and that is my Packmaster here. Hyenas, Hyenodons, and last laughs are probably the obvious picks for this creature's companions, but others could certainly fit as well. Festrogs come to mind, and they might be a fun fit as one of its friends, though you do lose out a little bit when you try to accompany it with mindless undead. Not to say you should write them off, but you won't be getting the most use out of her. And as I did say with the last laugh, I would refrain from running this creature solo, and honestly might even go doubly for this one, as it doesn't have much going on without a pack of its own to command. I'm looking into starting up a Patreon, but until then, let me know what you think of this creature and what other sorts of monsters you'd like to see in a comment. If you like what you see here and want more, be sure to leave a like and then subscribe to the channel. You can also check out the blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching and have a monstrous Monday.